The Canyon of No Return had always been a place shrouded in dark whispers. Locals told tales of a vast chasm in the mountains, where the wind howled through jagged cliffs, echoing the screams of those who had entered but never returned. In the town nearby, it was forbidden to speak too openly about it, but every now and then, a daring soul would venture in, drawn by the thrill of the unknown or the promise of treasure hidden deep within its folds. One fateful evening, 4 friends, Jake, Emily, Marcus, and Sarah, decided to test the legends. They gathered their gear, hoping to hike to the canyon's edge, take in the view, and return before dark. As they crossed the town's borders, a sense of unease settled over them. The air felt heavier. The trees seemed to bend away from the path, as though warning them to turn back. Unfazed, they continued. The journey was long and treacherous, with the trail becoming increasingly narrow as they descended into the canyon. The further they went, the more the atmosphere thickened, an unnatural silence filling the air. There were no birds, no animals, just the distant roar of a wind that didn't feel natural. Finally, they reached the bottom, where a dark river wound its way through the rocks. Jake, who had been the most confident, dared to approach the water's edge, and that's when it happened. The ground beneath them rumbled. The once peaceful canyon seemed to come alive. Rocks shifted, and the sky turned a deep, unnatural shade of red. Before they could react, a shadow appeared in the distance, a figure so tall and thin it was barely recognizable. It had eyes that gleamed like burning embers, and its movements were slow, deliberate. They tried to scream, but no sound escaped their lips. It was as if the canyon itself had swallowed their voices. One by one, the group was pulled into the darkness, vanishing without a trace. Their names would become part of the whispers carried on the wind, warning others who dared approach the canyon of no return. No one ever found their bodies, and the canyon remains as it always was, forever shrouded in mystery, with a new tale to tell with every passing storm. The world outside the canyon seemed to blur as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the eerie red light deeper into the rocky depths. Jake, Emily, Marcus, and Sarah huddled together near the dark river, their breaths shallow as the oppressive silence pressed down on them. Emily clutched her flashlight, its beam flickering erratically, casting wild shadows on the jagged canyon walls. "We should leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "Leave," Marcus scoffed, though his shaky voice betrayed his fear. "We just got here. It's probably just the wind." But they all knew it wasn't. The unnatural rumble from earlier still vibrated faintly beneath their feet, and the shadowy figure in the distance loomed in the back of their minds. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled again, more violently this time. Loose stones tumbled into the river, creating splashes that echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. The water began to ripple, not from the stones, but as though something massive was moving beneath its surface. "Run!" Sarah screamed, her voice breaking the spell of fear that had frozen them. They scrambled back toward the narrow path they had come down, but the canyon itself seemed to shift, the trail twisting and disappearing as if the land was alive, reshaping itself to trap them. The flickering light of Emily's flashlight caught something on the canyon wall, a strange symbol carved deep into the rock. It pulsed faintly with a crimson glow, and Marcus, unable to stop himself, reached out to touch it. "Don't!" Emily shouted, but it was too late. The moment Marcus's fingers brushed the symbol, the air around them erupted in a deafening roar. The red sky above darkened further as the shadowy figure from before began to move closer, its elongated limbs stretching unnaturally, its fiery eyes locked on them. The canyon's walls began to bleed shadows, tendrils of darkness slithering down to the ground and creeping toward the group. Emily swung her flashlight toward the approaching figure, but its beam seemed to be swallowed by the darkness before it could reach the entity. What does it want? Jake stammered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of the roaring wind and shifting rocks. It doesn't want anything, Sarah whispered, her face pale as she stared at the figure. It is the canyon. The realization struck like a thunderclap. The canyon of no return wasn't just a place. It was alive, an ancient, malevolent force that fed on the souls of those foolish enough to venture inside. Desperate, the group began to run blindly, their footsteps echoing against the shifting stone. The shadows pursued them relentlessly, and the figure grew larger, its form now towering over the cliffs. Its voice, if it could be called that, spoke in a language older than time, a guttural resonance that seemed to burrow into their minds. One by one they were separated. Jake's scream echoed first, cut short as the shadows engulfed him. Emily's flashlight finally gave out, leaving her in total darkness. She called out for the others, but only the sound of the river answered her. She didn't even see the shadows coming for her. Marcus and Sarah ran together, the last of the group. There has to be a way out, Marcus shouted, though his voice cracked with despair. They stumbled into a clearing where the red light above illuminated a massive stone altar, covered in the same glowing symbols they'd seen earlier. This is it, Sarah said, her voice trembling. It's the heart of the canyon. The ground rumbled violently, and the figure finally stepped into view. It wasn't entirely solid. Its body seemed to shift and blur, as though it were made of the same shadows that pursued them. It raised a massive, claw-like hand, and Marcus pushed Sarah out of the way just as the ground beneath him crumbled. "Run, Sarah!" he yelled as the darkness swallowed him whole. Sarah turned to flee, but the canyon had closed in around her. The figure loomed above, its fiery eyes locking onto hers. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she realized there was no escape. When the townspeople noticed the group had disappeared, they didn't bother organizing a search. They knew the canyon had claimed them, just as it had claimed so many others. But late at night, when the wind howled through the town, some claimed to hear faint whispers. Jake, Emily, Marcus, and Sarah calling for help, forever lost in the canyon of no return.